The billionaire's home was a place of comfort and luxury. Expensive furniture gleamed under the soft light of crystal chandeliers, and the gardens outside were immaculately cared for, full of flowers that seemed to bloom just for show. Yet, behind the walls of wealth and elegance, there was a deep worry that no money could fix. Their baby, only a few months old, was extremely sick. The family had called in 18 of the most renowned doctors from around the world. Each of these experts had a brilliant reputation, years of experience, and knowledge that most people could only dream of. Despite their combined efforts, the baby's condition continued to worsen, and hope seemed to be slipping away like sand through their fingers. The atmosphere in the house was heavy. Every room echoed with quiet anxiety, and the usually cheerful staff moved slowly, their faces etched with concern. The parents sat by the baby's side, holding tiny hands and whispering soothing words that barely made a difference. Their eyes, usually bright and confident, were now clouded with fear and exhaustion. They had spent a lifetime learning to control situations, to make the right decisions, but this was different. This was beyond any experience they had ever faced. Money, influence, and status meant nothing here. The only thing that mattered was their baby's fragile life. The doctors moved quickly but carefully, discussing every symptom, every test result, and every possible treatment. Machines beeped steadily in the background, monitoring the tiny body. The sounds, though normal to medical professionals, only added to the tension for the family. Every pause, every glance between doctors, carried a silent message. They were running out of time. Despite the advanced equipment, the baby's small chest rose and fell with effort, each breath a struggle, each moment a reminder that the situation was dire. Outside the private rooms, the staff whispered quietly among themselves. They had worked in this house for years and had seen wealth solve countless problems, but sickness like this was relentless. They felt powerless watching a tiny life hang in the balance. The baby had always been a source of joy and light, a reason for everyone to smile even on the hardest days. Now, that light seemed dim, and the feeling of helplessness weighed heavily on everyone. The parents had invited every possible specialist, hoping that someone would find a solution that had eluded all the others. They had spent sleepless nights, pacing the halls, worrying over every tiny symptom. Friends and family offered support, but even the kindest words could not erase the fear that gripped them. The parents whispered to each other, trying to stay calm, trying to focus on hope, but every moment seemed to bring more questions than answers. Even among the doctors, there was tension. Each one had faced medical challenges before, but this case was unusual and complex. They debated back and forth, sometimes raising their voices in frustration, other times speaking softly in careful, technical language. Tests were repeated, medications adjusted, and new treatments tried, but nothing worked. The baby remained weak, fragile, and unresponsive. The frustration was visible on the faces of the experts, who had never encountered such resistance to every known method of treatment. As the night fell, the house felt colder, not in temperature but in spirit. The soft glow of the lights seemed dimmer, the usual warmth replaced by a tense silence. The parents held each other close, trying to draw strength from one another, but even their shared courage was tested. They had built a life of success and security, but in this moment, they realized that some things could not be controlled by wealth or power. Life, delicate and unpredictable, was a force that demanded respect, patience, and hope. In one quiet corner of the hospital room that had been set up in their home, a nurse adjusted the blankets around the baby. She watched the tiny chest rise and fall and felt her heart tighten. She had seen many patients in her career, but there was something about this baby, something so fragile, that made her feel helpless despite her training. Every moment seemed critical, every sound a possible warning. The baby's small hands twitched, a reminder that life was still present, stubborn and fragile, refusing to give up. Outside the room, the air was filled with a mix of hope and fear. The doctors spoke in hushed tones, sharing updates with the parents. Each conversation carried the weight of uncertainty. Families who had faced illness before knew that hope could be fleeting, that one moment things could seem better and the next moment everything could fall apart. Here, in this house of wealth and influence, those lessons were no different. The difference was that this family had all the resources in the world, yet even that could not guarantee a miracle. The baby's cries, soft and weak, punctuated the tense atmosphere. Each sound was a reminder of the battle being fought, a struggle that no one wanted to end in loss. The parents leaned closer, speaking words of comfort, kissing tiny foreheads, and holding hands as if their presence alone could bring relief. Their voices shook, not just with fear, but with love, a fierce determination that had no boundaries. They refused to accept defeat, even when the odds seemed impossible. Throughout the night, the doctors tried different methods. Some suggested advanced treatments, others spoke of experimental approaches. Every idea was considered, every method tested, but none brought the breakthrough that was desperately needed. Exhaustion weighed on the team, but there was no time for rest. Every second counted, and the baby's life depended on their knowledge, skill, and quick decisions. They worked tirelessly, their focus unwavering, even as frustration and doubt crept in. The parents watched silently, a mix of hope and fear reflected in their eyes. They had always believed in careful planning and preparation, in controlling every detail of their lives. But here, they were faced with the ultimate reminder that life was unpredictable. No matter how much wealth or power they had, they were powerless against the fragility of a tiny human life. And yet, even in the midst of despair, there was a glimmer of hope, a belief that somehow, someway, their baby could be saved. As the first light of morning filtered through the windows, the tension remained. The house, so often a place of laughter and comfort, was now a place of silent prayer and quiet desperation. Every heartbeat, every breath, was a reminder of what was at stake. The parents clung to each other, to hope, and to the possibility that a miracle could happen. Little did they know, the answer to their prayers was about to come from an unexpected place. Someone they would never have imagined could make a difference. A spark of hope lingered in the air, waiting for the moment when the impossible would become possible. In a small neighborhood not far from the bustling city, a 12-year-old girl lived a life very different from the world of wealth and luxury. Her home was modest, filled with the laughter and warmth of a close-knit family, though money was always scarce. She spent her days helping around the house, attending school, and learning everything she could from books, videos, and her own curiosity. She was quiet, thoughtful, and often noticed details that others overlooked. While her peers were busy with games and social media, she read about science, medicine, and the human body, fascinated by how life worked in ways that seemed like magic to most. One morning, as she helped her grandmother prepare breakfast, she overheard a conversation about a baby who was critically ill. The story seemed to come from nowhere, spreading quickly through the community. People spoke about the baby of a billionaire family, a tiny life hanging by a thread despite the efforts of the best doctors. Her eyes widened as she listened, absorbing every word. She didn't know why, but something about the story drew her in. She felt a pull, a sense that she could do something, even if it seemed impossible. Her heart ached for the baby, and she began to think, almost instinctively, about what could be done to help. The girl had always been observant, noticing things others missed. She remembered lessons from her grandmother about herbal remedies, from school about basic human anatomy, and from hours spent watching educational programs online. Piece by piece, she started forming a picture in her mind. She didn't tell anyone at first. She just sat quietly, thinking through the possibilities. She knew she wasn't a doctor and had no medical authority, but her mind raced with ideas, combinations of knowledge and intuition that might make a difference. Her parents noticed her distraction but assumed she was daydreaming as usual. She didn't explain what was on her mind. She simply continued to work quietly, planning. She thought about how the human body responds to illness, how tiny changes can make a big difference, and how even small actions could support life. She considered everything: nutrition, positioning, breathing, and how to keep a baby calm and comfortable. In her mind, she formed a plan, testing each step carefully in theory, imagining the tiny chest rising and falling more easily, imagining the baby gaining strength bit by bit. News about the billionaire's baby spread faster than she could imagine. Social media and local news broadcasts reported updates every hour, showing the parents in despair and the medical team struggling to find solutions. People from every corner of the city followed the story, offering prayers, messages, and support. The girl watched, feeling both helpless and determined. She realized that this was no ordinary situation. Despite the resources and expertise surrounding the baby, nothing had worked. She felt a strange certainty, a belief that perhaps someone outside the expected circle, someone small, someone ordinary, could bring a fresh perspective. Her decision didn't come easily. She knew she would face skepticism and doubt. Doctors, parents, and even strangers might dismiss her ideas simply because she was young and unknown. But she also felt a quiet courage inside, the kind that comes when you care deeply for someone else's life. She decided she had to try. She gathered a few supplies from home, read through everything she could find about infant care, and rehearsed what she would say and do if given the chance. She imagined the baby's tiny hands, the fragile breathing, and the warmth of life that could be saved if her plan worked. It became more than a thought, it became a mission. The girl's opportunity came when a neighbor, aware of her keen mind and problem-solving ability, mentioned her ideas to a distant relative of the billionaire family. They were skeptical at first, but desperate for a solution, they agreed to allow her to be introduced. She traveled to the grand home, carrying nothing but hope and her carefully considered plan. Her small frame and calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the tension in the mansion. Staff members watched curiously, unsure of how a child could possibly contribute. She did not speak at first, quietly observing the machines, the baby, and the anxious faces around her. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but confident. She suggested adjustments, small but precise actions that could support the baby's recovery. The doctors exchanged doubtful glances, some shaking their heads subtly, thinking a child's suggestion could not possibly help. But there was something in her reasoning, a clarity and logic that could not be ignored. She explained step by step what she thought should be done, not demanding authority, but offering insight and perspective. The parents listened, a flicker of hope igniting in their eyes, sensing that perhaps this young girl had a spark that might make a difference. For hours, she stayed by the baby, helping to adjust position, gently suggesting how to calm and support the infant. She explained why certain movements, feeds, or comforts could encourage better breathing and digestion. Her approach was different from the clinical precision of the doctors. It was intuitive, compassionate, and deeply human. She paid attention to details that machines and medical jargon could not capture, noticing subtle cues from the baby's tiny body and adjusting accordingly. She worked quietly, steadily, without complaint, showing patience and determination far beyond her age. The doctors, still skeptical but also curious, began to observe the changes. Slowly, very slowly, they noticed small signs of improvement. The baby's chest rose a little easier, the tiny hands twitched with more strength, and the cries became less strained. A spark of hope began to enter the room. The parents watched in amazement, holding their breath with every movement. It was clear that the girl's attention and actions, so gentle and thoughtful, were having an effect that no one had expected. Throughout this time, the girl never sought recognition. She focused entirely on the baby, on what needed to be done, on staying calm and patient. She encouraged the adults around her, helping them adjust to her approach without insisting she was right. Her humility and focus on care rather than fame created a peaceful energy in the room. Even in the midst of the high tension and fear that had dominated the night, people began to see that knowledge was not limited by age or social status, that sometimes the freshest perspective could come from an unexpected source. By the end of the day, small improvements had been made. Though the baby was still fragile, there was now a glimmer of hope that had not existed before. The doctors, parents, and staff began to reconsider the situation, quietly acknowledging that this child's insight had made a real difference. They began to integrate her suggestions alongside their treatments, seeing how even small adjustments could improve the baby's stability. The girl remained humble, never celebrating her own contribution. She simply focused on the baby, on the next steps on what could be done to support life. Her presence became a quiet reassurance to everyone around, a reminder that compassion, attention, and intelligence could make a difference even in the most hopeless situations. The parents, though still anxious, felt a new kind of hope, a belief that perhaps their baby's life was not lost, and that the impossible might just be possible after all. As night approached again, the girl sat quietly, observing, thinking, and planning. Her dedication was unwavering. In the midst of luxury, wealth, and high medical expertise, it was the determination and insight of a 12-year-old girl that was beginning to shift the course of events. And while everyone in the room realized that the journey was far from over, they could not deny that her presence had brought something extraordinary. A spark of hope, the courage to try something new, and the possibility that the unthinkable could soon become reality. The house was quiet, filled with a tense stillness that only grew heavier as the hours passed. Doctors, parents, and staff moved carefully around the baby, their eyes constantly monitoring the fragile movements and tiny breathing. The 12-year-old girl remained close, observing and learning from every detail, while carefully applying her own gentle suggestions. She was calm, steady, and focused in a way that made those around her take notice. Her youth and size seemed insignificant compared to the quiet confidence she carried. Despite the complexity of the baby's condition, she approached each problem with patience and thoughtfulness. She noticed subtle signs that even the seasoned doctors could miss, like slight shifts in the baby's breathing or tension in the tiny muscles. She made gentle adjustments to the baby's position, quietly explaining why each movement could help. Her voice was soft, almost like a whisper, but every word carried clarity and reasoning. Doctors exchanged looks, unsure at first, but slowly they began to see that her ideas were working in ways they hadn't anticipated. The girl never demanded attention or authority. Instead, she guided others with quiet wisdom, showing by example how to care for the baby with both precision and compassion. She reminded the adults to pay attention to the small details, to be patient, and to trust their instincts alongside the technology and knowledge they had. Her approach was different from the clinical routines of the doctors. It was human, intuitive, and deeply attentive. It balanced the science of medicine with the empathy and care that only someone genuinely invested in the baby's well-being could provide. As the day moved forward, a subtle change began to appear. The baby, still fragile, started to show small signs of improvement. Breathing became slightly easier, movements more coordinated, and the tiny fingers and toes seemed to grasp life with a little more strength. Parents watched with a mixture of relief and disbelief, feeling hope blossom where there had been only fear and despair. They could not fully explain why this young girl's presence made a difference, but the results were undeniable. The room felt lighter, the tension easing slightly as small victories began to emerge. The doctors were amazed. They had faced countless difficult cases, but rarely had they witnessed an intervention like this. At first, they had been skeptical, unsure of how a child could contribute meaningfully. But as they observed the baby's slight recovery, they realized that her insights were rooted in careful observation, logical reasoning, and a unique perspective that complemented their expertise. Slowly, the doctors began to integrate her suggestions into their routine care, watching closely to see the effect of each adjustment. It was a collaboration of sorts, blending professional knowledge with intuition and compassion. Even the staff who had been with the family for years felt the shift. Their usual roles had been defined by schedules, procedures, and routines, but now they were learning from someone who had no experience, yet brought a fresh perspective that was proving effective. They adjusted their care practices based on her gentle guidance, noting how her small adjustments had a larger impact on the baby's comfort and stability. The atmosphere in the house, once heavy with worry, began to feel more hopeful, though everyone remained aware that the journey was far from over. The girl's focus never wavered. She watched every twitch of the baby's hand, every subtle change in breathing, and every movement of the tiny body. Her mind was constantly calculating, thinking ahead to the next small adjustment that could make a difference. She encouraged the parents, who were exhausted and anxious, to stay calm and patient, reminding them that every small step mattered. Her presence became a source of strength for everyone in the room, a quiet reassurance that they were not powerless, even in the face of such a critical situation. Time seemed to stretch, each minute carrying the weight of possibility and fear. The girl remained composed, never showing panic or frustration. She understood that the baby's life depended not only on knowledge but also on calm, steady care. She modeled patience for the adults around her, demonstrating how attention, observation, and gentle action could work together to support life. Her quiet confidence inspired others to follow her guidance, even when it defied conventional expectations. The baby's parents were deeply moved by her courage and dedication. They had never imagined that someone so young, from a completely different world, could bring hope into their lives. They watched as she carefully guided the care team, explaining each step with clarity and reason, showing compassion for the baby and for the exhausted adults who surrounded them. Their respect for her grew with each passing hour, tempered with awe at the way she navigated such a high-pressure situation with grace and intelligence. Despite the challenges, the girl never faltered. She maintained a careful balance between observation, intervention, and reassurance. She encouraged small acts of care that were overlooked in the rush and stress of the situation. She reminded the adults to notice the subtle signals the baby was sending, to adjust their approach based on tiny changes, and to combine scientific knowledge with empathy and intuition. The baby responded, slowly but unmistakably, to the human-centered care that the girl had introduced. As night approached, a quiet calm settled over the room. The baby, though still vulnerable, was showing signs of life that had not been visible before. Breathing was steadier, movements more coordinated, and a small color began to return to the tiny skin. The parents, exhausted but grateful, held their breath and watched with hope. The doctors, who had initially doubted the impact a child could have, were forced to reconsider their assumptions. They observed with careful attention, noting how the girl's gentle methods were working alongside their medical expertise. The girl remained humble, never seeking praise or recognition. Her focus was entirely on the baby, on making the next small improvement, and on staying calm in a situation that could easily become overwhelming. Her actions reminded everyone in the room that care, compassion, and attention to detail were as important as knowledge and skill. She had brought a perspective that no one expected, a human touch that complemented the clinical precision of the medical team. The night passed with careful attention, guided by the girl's quiet wisdom. Every small improvement was celebrated silently, a reassurance that life could be supported even in the most fragile circumstances. The parents began to feel a cautious optimism, understanding that their baby was not out of danger but was now receiving care that had a real, tangible effect. The doctors continued their work, now integrating her suggestions with their medical knowledge, seeing how intuition and human-centered observation could enhance even the most advanced treatment. By the early morning, a sense of calm hope had settled over the house. The baby, still tiny and fragile, had responded to the care provided by the girl's unique approach. The doctors, staff, and parents recognized that her presence had changed the trajectory of the situation. She had not only provided new insights but had also brought a sense of calm, hope, and human connection that was essential for the baby's recovery. Her dedication and intelligence had made a difference where expertise and resources alone had failed. The girl remained quietly at the side of the baby, watching, learning, and adjusting. She understood that this was just the beginning, that there was still a long path ahead, but she also knew that hope had been restored. In a house filled with wealth and knowledge, it was the courage, attention, and care of a 12-year-old girl from a modest neighborhood that was making the impossible seem possible. And in that quiet, determined presence, everyone began to believe that life, even in its most fragile form, could be protected and nurtured by the human heart. The atmosphere in the house had changed. The tense fear of the first days was giving way to cautious hope. The baby, still tiny and vulnerable, was showing signs of life that had once seemed impossible. Breathing was steadier, small movements were more coordinated, and the faintest glimmer of strength had returned to tiny limbs. The parents, exhausted but attentive, watched with relief, unable to stop themselves from smiling at each small improvement. They still worried constantly, but there was now a sense that the impossible might actually be within reach. The 12-year-old girl continued her work with calm determination. She had learned quickly, observing how the baby responded to every adjustment and carefully noting which methods helped and which did not. She guided the adults around her, suggesting subtle changes that no one else had thought of. Her suggestions were not based on arrogance but on careful observation and intuition. She showed that understanding and patience could be just as important as technical knowledge in moments of crisis. The doctors, now fully engaged, had begun to see the brilliance of her approach. They integrated her ideas with their medical expertise, testing each step with care. The girl never demanded authority or recognition, but her presence had created a quiet leadership in the room. Everyone followed her guidance because it was logical, gentle, and effective. The baby responded in ways that no one expected, improving steadily under the combined care of medical science and human intuition. The parents were amazed. They had spent millions on the best medical care available, yet it had taken the insight of a child to spark a real change. They watched her work and felt a deep sense of gratitude. Her actions reminded them that courage, intelligence, and compassion are not limited by age, wealth, or experience. They whispered words of thanks whenever she looked their way, and although she smiled modestly, she never sought attention or praise. Each day brought small victories. The baby's tiny hands grasped a finger with more strength. Lips parted in a weak but audible cry, and the color in the cheeks became more visible. It was clear that life had returned in a fragile but undeniable form. The girl's presence was like a gentle wind guiding the tiny ship of the baby's life through the storm. Every small improvement encouraged everyone to keep moving forward, to try new methods, and to maintain patience and hope. The staff of the house, from the nurses to the caregivers, felt the shift as well. They had watched fear and anxiety dominate the first days, but now a sense of calm purpose had replaced panic. The girl's careful instructions and calm demeanor gave them confidence. They followed her lead, adjusting their care techniques and paying attention to the small details she emphasized. They noticed the baby's response to human touch, to patience, and to compassion, and they realized that technical knowledge alone was not enough. Time moved slowly, each hour filled with careful observation, gentle interventions, and a constant watchfulness over the baby. The girl remained steadfast, never growing tired or impatient. Her youth seemed to disappear in the face of her determination. She guided the care with precision, noticing changes that others overlooked. She reminded everyone to be gentle, to observe, and to trust the baby's subtle signals. Her ability to remain calm and focused became an anchor for the entire room. The baby's parents experienced a mix of awe and humility. They had been accustomed to controlling situations, making decisions, and achieving results. Now they were learning that sometimes the smallest voice, the quietest presence, can make the biggest difference. Watching the girl work, they realized that their wealth and power could not guarantee life, but love, observation, and dedication could. Their hearts were full of gratitude, and tears often came unbidden as they saw their child respond to the care. Even the doctors, with their years of experience and prestigious backgrounds, were learning. They had never witnessed such a combination of intelligence, patience, and empathy in someone so young. Her approach was different from theirs, blending knowledge with intuition, science with compassion. Slowly, they began to trust her perspective, implementing her suggestions while monitoring the effects closely. The results spoke for themselves, as the baby responded with small but consistent signs of improvement. The room was alive with quiet energy. Machines beeped, monitors displayed vital signs, and every movement was filled with care. The girl's calm presence influenced everyone around her. The staff followed her guidance, the parents listened attentively, and the doctors integrated her ideas into their treatment. It was a collaboration that went beyond titles, wealth, or experience. It was a shared effort to protect life, inspired by someone who saw what others had missed. As days passed, the baby grew stronger. Tiny smiles appeared, weak at first but genuine. The first sounds of a laugh, soft and delicate, brought tears to the eyes of everyone in the room. The parents held each other, their relief almost overwhelming. The girl continued her work with the same quiet determination, never seeking recognition but fully invested in the baby's recovery. Her intuition and care had changed the course of events, proving that even in the most critical situations, hope could be found in unexpected places. The community, upon hearing of the girl's involvement, was amazed. People marveled at how a child, with no formal authority or power, could make such a difference. Yet for those in the house, it was never about fame or recognition. It was about life, about observing, caring, and acting with wisdom and compassion. The girl's humility, intelligence, and dedication inspired everyone who witnessed her work. The baby's progress continued steadily. Each day brought new milestones. Stronger breathing, more coordinated movements, and a more responsive demeanor. The girl remained a constant presence, guiding care, noticing subtle signs, and suggesting adjustments. Her patience and clarity influenced everyone, creating an atmosphere of calm focus and hope. The baby responded to this human-centered care in ways that medical knowledge alone could not have achieved. The parents, though still cautious, began to speak openly about their gratitude. They praised the girl's courage and insight, marveling at how she had made a difference where experience and wealth had not. They spoke of lessons learned, that attention to detail, patience, and love could achieve what resources alone could not. The girl, always humble, simply nodded, focusing on the next step in the baby's recovery. In the quiet moments, when the baby slept peacefully, the girl would sit nearby, observing and reflecting. She understood that her actions had already changed the course of the baby's life, but she remained aware that the journey was far from over. She planned carefully, thinking ahead to what the baby would need next, and how to support continued growth and strength. Her focus never wavered, her dedication never faltered, and her presence remained a beacon of hope for everyone in the house. By the time the sun set, a sense of calm triumph filled the air. The baby, once in critical danger, had responded to the combined efforts of medical knowledge and human-centered care. The girl's unique insight, quiet courage, and careful attention had made the difference. The parents held their child close, tears of relief flowing freely, while the doctors and staff marveled at the unexpected turn of events. Life had returned to the fragile body, thanks to the intuition, observation, and dedication of a 12-year-old girl who had refused to give up. The baby's recovery continued steadily, day by day, with tiny but remarkable improvements. Breathing was stronger, movements more coordinated, and the fragile body showed the first signs of vitality that had been missing for so long. The parents could hardly believe what they were witnessing. Each small milestone was a victory, and they celebrated quietly, not with grand gestures, but with heartfelt relief and gratitude. They knew they had faced the worst moments of their lives and were now witnessing the miracle of hope restored. The 12-year-old girl remained a constant presence, guiding the care with unwavering focus and humility. Her attention to detail, careful observation, and calm demeanor continued to influence everyone around her. Doctors, who had once been skeptical of her involvement, now relied on her insights alongside their medical expertise. They observed her methods, learned from her intuition, and adjusted their treatments accordingly. It was clear that her approach had brought something unique, a combination of human-centered care, patience, and compassion that no amount of experience alone could replicate. The parents spent hours by the baby's side, holding tiny hands and whispering words of love. They often looked at the girl with awe, marveling at how someone so young, with no formal authority or recognition, had changed the course of their child's life. Their gratitude was endless, and they expressed it in quiet ways, offering words of thanks, gentle smiles, and relief that their baby was slowly but surely growing stronger. They also understood that the girl's efforts were driven not by fame or reward, but by a genuine desire to help. The household staff and nurses who had witnessed the journey were equally moved. They had seen fear, frustration, and despair, but now they saw the transformative power of calm observation, compassion, and dedication. The girl had taught them that even in the most critical situations, human connection and attention could make the difference. They followed her lead, learned from her methods, and applied these insights to ensure that the baby's care remained consistent, attentive, and nurturing. Outside the home, news of the baby's situation and the young girl's involvement spread slowly at first, then more widely. People were amazed that a child could make such a difference. And yet, for those inside the house, it was never about recognition. It was about life, about observing and responding with care and intelligence, and about staying calm and patient even when the stakes were highest. The girl's humility, bravery, and insight became an inspiration for everyone who learned her story. Each day brought new progress. The baby's cries became stronger, expressing needs and feelings more clearly. Tiny fingers grasped the parents' hands with more force, a sign of growing strength and vitality. The first smiles appeared, soft and delicate, bringing tears to the eyes of the parents and everyone in the room. Even the doctors, who had once been doubtful, marveled at the remarkable changes, realizing that the combination of medical expertise and human-centered care had created a pathway to recovery that neither could achieve alone. The girl continued to offer her guidance with quiet confidence. She observed the baby's subtle cues, adjusted positioning, and suggested actions that made care more effective. She reminded everyone to remain patient, to notice even the smallest improvements, and to provide comfort and encouragement alongside medical treatment. Her presence became a source of reassurance, calming the parents and staff alike, and creating an environment in which the baby could thrive. The parents, though still cautious, began to experience moments of pure joy. They saw their child respond to care, react to voices, and move with strength that had seemed impossible just days before. They reflected on the lessons learned, that wealth and power could not solve every problem, but love, observation, and dedication could make the impossible possible. They whispered words of thanks to the girl, their gratitude deep and unwavering, while recognizing that her courage and insight had saved their baby. The doctors and staff also reflected on the unexpected lessons of the situation. They recognized that knowledge alone was not enough and that compassion, attention to subtle details, and human intuition were equally important. The girl's approach had reminded them that life is fragile, that every action matters, and that hope can come from the most unexpected sources. They adopted her methods where appropriate, blending experience and expertise with her intuitive understanding of the baby's needs. As the baby grew stronger, small milestones became sources of celebration. The first unassisted breaths, the first sounds of a laugh, and the first attempts at reaching out with tiny hands brought profound relief and joy. The parents shared quiet moments of happiness, holding their child and whispering promises of care, protection, and love. They felt a deep sense of humility and gratitude, understanding that life is precious, delicate, and sometimes dependent on the courage and insight of unexpected heroes. The girl, always humble, never sought attention for her actions. She focused entirely on the baby, ensuring that care remained consistent, safe, and nurturing. Her presence inspired everyone in the house, showing that courage, patience, and careful observation can make a profound difference. She became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the most desperate situations, someone with a sharp mind and a compassionate heart can change the course of events. The community that had followed the story was filled with admiration. People spoke of the girl's courage, intelligence, and compassion, marveling at how she had made such a significant impact. Yet, she remained grounded, her focus entirely on the baby's well-being rather than fame or recognition. Her humility and dedication made her story even more inspiring, proving that true heroism often comes quietly and without expectation of reward. Over time, the baby's health stabilized. The fragile life that had once been in grave danger now responded to care, growing stronger and healthier with each passing day. The parents, doctors, and staff celebrated quietly but sincerely, recognizing the extraordinary journey that had led to this point. They had witnessed something remarkable. A child's courage, insight, and dedication had made the difference when even the most advanced medical expertise had struggled. The girl's presence had left a lasting impact on everyone involved. She had shown that compassion, careful observation, and a willingness to act could create miracles. The parents learned that wealth and power could not solve every problem, but humility, patience, and human-centered care could. The doctors learned that experience, when combined with intuition and empathy, could achieve remarkable results. And the girl herself learned the power of courage, knowledge, and persistence in making a difference. As the baby grew stronger, the family began to return to a sense of normalcy. The house, once filled with tension and fear, was now filled with quiet relief and hope. The girl remained a humble presence, quietly observing and ensuring that the baby's care continued smoothly. She had become more than a helper. She had become a symbol of hope, courage, and the extraordinary impact that one person can have when they refuse to give up. The journey was long, filled with challenges, fear, and uncertainty, but it had also been filled with courage, compassion, and hope. The baby, once on the brink of life and death, was now growing stronger each day. The parents and staff would never forget the lessons learned from this experience. That life is fragile, that every action matters, and that hope can come from the most unexpected sources. They knew that a 12-year-old girl, with her intelligence, determination, and compassion, had changed everything. In the end, the baby's recovery was celebrated quietly but profoundly. It was a triumph not just of medical knowledge but of human care, patience, and attention. The girl's presence had proven that even the smallest, youngest, or most unlikely individuals can make a difference in the most critical situations. Her actions had inspired everyone who witnessed them, showing that courage, compassion, and careful observation can turn despair into hope, and that even the unthinkable can become possible with the right heart and mind at work.